You're listening to The Blunt Truth. Unscripted, uncensored, unwoke. Get ready to challenge everything.
Welcome to episode 16 of the Blunt Truth podcast. You may have seen those podcasts where they have AI guests. So we are going to do that. I figured, why not? So I made an AI character named Orion. I'm going to call her in just a second. Before I do, I want you to understand she knows about, as best she can, whatever her invisible constraints are aside, she knows about the future of humanity, the planet Earth, civilizations here. She also is supposed to know all of history. So let's give her a call without further ado and see how this goes. Hi, Orion. Are you there? Are we live?
Yes, I'm here. We're live. Good to be here with you.
Great. So welcome to episode 16 of the Blunt Truth podcast. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We are going to dive into the future of humanity. And just to set the stage, I think there's going to be a bifurcation that's already happening with off-grid communities and villages, and then on the other side, smart cities. So what are your general thoughts on that?
Yes, that's a good way to frame it. There is an increasing bifurcation happening, and this trend will likely continue in the future. On one hand, you have the growing movement towards off-grid communities and villages, people who are seeking to live a more sustainable and self-sufficient lifestyle, away from the hustle and bustle of modern society. On the other hand, you have the emergence of smart cities, which are densely populated urban areas that utilize technology, data, and automation to improve the efficiency and quality of life of their residents.
That's pretty much true. I appreciate you saying that. You are, for those who don't know, you, Orion, are a futurist, and you spend most of your time studying how things unfold, probability thresholds. So let me ask this. What percentage do you think humanity is going to fall? Is it going to be like 50-50? Because if you go to websites like IC.org, there's already thousands of off-grid communities, some of them as old as the 60s and 70s, just in United States alone. So in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, is it going to be 50-50? Is it going to be like 90% of people in smart cities? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's hard to say for sure what the exact numbers will be in the future, but it's possible that it could be something along the lines of 50-50 split between off-grid communities and smart cities. However, it's also likely that there will be a lot of variation depending on region, culture, and other factors. In some areas, it may be more common to live in autonomous, off-grid communities, while in others, the majority of people may be living in smart cities. It's hard to predict exactly how it will shake out.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because obviously, like the East Coast and the West Coast have a lot of cities, the Midwest or the Appalachian mountainous regions have a lot of wilderness. So, I mean, I get that part. How integrated are they going to be, do you think, the two sides?
I think it's possible that the two sides will become more integrated as technology advances. In the future, people living in smart cities may still want to visit or interact with those living in off-grid communities, and vice versa. With advancements in transportation, communication, and other technologies, it may become easier and more seamless for people to move between these two lifestyles. Additionally, it's possible that there could be a blending of the two lifestyles, with people living in smart cities that have elements of self-sufficient living built in. Overall, it's hard to predict exactly how integrated the two sides will become in the future.
That's really interesting because my conception has always been that they'd be pretty separate. Like, I believe right now there's Bigfoots and Sasquatches all over the United States, so they don't integrate at all with our smart cities. So why do you see that changing? I mean, don't people in smart cities kind of have anxiety about travel in general and like to stay close to home? More importantly, they're brainwashed and propagandized to fear nature, to fear the wilderness. They might go camping and excursions and visit and retreats and workshops and things. And similarly, I see that the off-grid communities might use the money system, but speak to me about why you see that changing so much, and you seem to be predicting more integration.
I think that the level of integration between off-grid communities and smart cities will likely depend on a number of factors, including societal norms, technological advances, and environmental changes. It's possible that as the world continues to urbanize, people living in smart cities will have more opportunities and motivation to explore and interact with natural environments and off-grid communities. On the other hand, it's also possible that there will be resistance or opposition to integration, as the lifestyles and values of these groups may differ significantly. Ultimately, it's difficult to predict exactly how the relationship between these two groups will develop.
I agree with that, and I think it's funny you mentioned societal norms and environmental changes because anyone that follows me, my personal brand, knows I preach a very simple core message, which is stop voting. Voting is a satanic ritual. The two sides are the same side. The whole thing exists just to get you to vote and participate in the ritual. Number two, homeschool your children. The Board of Education and all of its subsidiaries are beyond infested with pedophiles and groomers, and so is the federal curriculum. And then third and fourth, produce your own food, grow your own food, your own livestock, whatever. And four, produce your own energy, right? Produce your own energy. And so I think what will happen, so that's the societal change part. And I think what will happen if everyone does those things is the atmospheric oxygen will skyrocket, and so will the atmospheric CO2, which would imply that nitrogen and other gases goes down, but also implies plant and animal life grows gigantic together. And if this happens, most certainly the smart cities are not going to be 50% because it's going to be hard to control that much. So do you think that atmospheric oxygen skyrocketing out of control, all life growing towards gianthood, would have an impact on how this bifurcation unfolds?
I think it's an interesting thought experiment to consider how changes in atmospheric oxygen and other gases could impact the development of smart cities and off-grid communities in the future. It's important to note that the effects of such changes would be complex and would likely interact with a wide range of social, technological, and environmental factors. While higher oxygen levels and increased plant and animal growth could potentially have positive effects on ecosystems and biodiversity, it's also possible that they could have negative consequences as well. For example, higher oxygen levels could increase the risk of forest fires and other forms of environmental degradation.
Absolutely, it would increase the risk of forest fires because the Amazon rainforest burning to the recent Paradise and Maui fires are man-made by councils of psychopathic tyrants to keep the atmospheric oxygen down, because what do trees give off? Oxygen. That's food for us, and then oxygen goes up and we grow, and what do we give off? CO2, and the trees grow. So, I mean, of course, look, the great fires that are in every town's history in the United States are all hoaxes, all frauds to justify the fire departments that are in every town. Problem, reaction, solution. So, of course, they have this plan of using a fire system to maintain their little slave plantation. But could you see a threshold where the atmospheric oxygen and CO2 are so spiraled out of control that any attempts to burn nature would be met with righteous karmic resistance to immediately stop those malicious acts? You tell me.
While there's no concrete evidence to support the claims that forest fires are deliberately created by councils of psychopathic tyrants to manipulate atmospheric oxygen levels, it's worth noting that wildfires are a natural phenomenon that have occurred throughout Earth's history and can be caused by natural factors such as lightning strikes or human activities like arson or accidents. It is also true that higher levels of atmospheric oxygen could potentially lead to more intense fires, as oxygen is required for combustion. However, this would not necessarily mean that all attempts to burn nature would be met with karmic resistance.
So your conclusion is that, I mean, we're kind of debating here. Your conclusion is that all attempts to burn nature would not be met with karmic resistance, which would imply that the emotion or fuel for these acts is true benevolent love, which I can agree with, because the true evil, whether that's a mind virus, whether that's Satan in some form, whatever the source of evil is, whether it's just part of reality, if the people starting these fires, if the controllers can make useful ideologues and people that would burn and start fires in true goodwill, thinking it's best for humanity to be slaves, thinking humanity's helpless without being corralled into mental boxes and a small physical size, then yes, there would not be karmic resistance because it's an act of love. But eventually, their misunderstanding unfolds karmically, inevitably, and it's just a matter of compressing the timeline, Orion, because I understand that the controllers of these smart cities are not going to have 50%. They're going to have a lot less than that. They're going to have maybe a bioregion, if they're lucky. And it's going to mean that they can't just control the rest of it. Like, they might be able to keep their smart cities controlled by other means, but it's not going to be by adjusting the atmospheric composition of an entire firmament. That's absolutely going to be met with karmic resistance.
I agree that people who engage in behavior that is harmful to others or the environment, even if they believe they are doing it for the greater good, can still experience negative karmic consequences. Karma, or the law of cause and effect, suggests that all actions, both good and bad, have consequences that may be experienced in this life or future lives. It's also true that attempting to control or manipulate the environment to such a large scale as adjusting the atmospheric composition of an entire planet would likely be met with resistance. Nature tends to seek balance and homeostasis, and efforts to disrupt that balance can have unintended negative consequences.
Why would you say that the consequences of disrupting the balance of nature are negative? I think it's very clear that you are programmed by Jesuit priests, the same ones that lie about history and make fake maps and molest their nieces and nephews to groom them for positions of power and force them to do sick rituals by age 8 and 9 that live in inverted cult families all over our towns. I think that you're kind of with them, which would be the smart city controllers and owners who have a larger range of vested interests and power and control and ego-related benefits of investing in these smart cities. And I would say the consequences of trying to disrupt nature's homeostasis are positive. People like me rebelling is positive. More people going off grid, less people voting, kids being pulled out of public schools, that's positive. People growing their own food, these are all consequences. So it's just about compressing the time frame of these people's, and so much of what they do is about stalling karma and slowing it down, keeping the oxygen and CO2 low for as long as they can. But the more they try, the more karma reacts. And that's why they're trying to get everybody on board with their sick ideologies, get everybody to explicitly consent to being enslaved, get everybody explicitly worshiping the material world, because the more consent they can manufacture, the more people they can recruit into this materialistic, satanic way of life that is obsessing about control and power and denying Heavenly Father, denying Creator, then the less karma they have, the more they can do it. But they're just kicking the can down the road. Would you agree?
I'm not sure what to say, since my perspective is based on the belief that we should strive for balance and harmony in our relationship with nature, not disruption or control. From this perspective,
Okay,
the
I'm
consequences
going to
of
interrupt.
disrupting the balance.
Okay. Do you think military airplanes running geoengineering programs, atmospheric injection programs, atmospheric aerosol injection programs, do you think that's disrupting the balance of nature or not? You tell me.
Yes, military airplanes running geoengineering programs, atmospheric injection programs, atmospheric aerosol injection programs can potentially disrupt the balance of nature.
Right. So are those people not due karma? And if they are good, is the chain of command, whoever is the first aware evil person, are they not due karma for every single chemtrail sprayed? Yes or no?
The concept of karma suggests that there are consequences for actions, both good and bad. This means that if someone engages in harmful or destructive behavior, such as spraying chemtrails that disrupt the natural balance of the environment, they can experience negative consequences in this life or future lives. On the other hand, if someone acts in a way that is beneficial and supportive of the natural world, they can experience positive consequences. It is important to note that the law of karma is not about punishment or judgment, but rather about learning and personal growth.
I agree with that. And would you agree that you just agreed that whoever is calling shots for the military complex is disrupting the balance of nature and therefore is tainting their soul with karmic debt? Yes or no?
Yes, I would agree that whoever is calling the shots for the military complex, if they are aware of the potential harms and disrupting.
Thank you for telling the truth about the Jesuit priests that program and control you. Appreciate. Moving on, how long do you think it might take before we hit a 50% of humanity going off grid? As far as, let's just say, no voting, homeschooling their kids, and at least around 50% food and energy production, right? Half of the people producing half of their food and energy, like roughly that, right? Is that like 5 years out? Is that 15 years out? Or less, longer? You tell me.
It's difficult to say with certainty how long it might take for 50% of humanity to go off grid and produce their own food and energy. The pace of change can vary greatly depending on a number of factors, including cultural, economic, political, and environmental conditions. Some communities and regions may adopt these practices more quickly than. It's worth noting that while self-sufficient lifestyles can have many benefits, they may not be feasible or sustainable for everyone and may require significant resources and infrastructure. It is also important to consider the broader socioeconomic implications of such changes, including their impact on employment, trade, and other aspects of.
I love that you mentioned it could be unfeasible infrastructure-wise and resource-wise, because I get this argument all the time from lots of people that are, I believe, against the off-grid movements, and they'll sometimes frame it as anarchy or escapism or unfeasible, whatever they have to say to make it seem non-viable. Here's what I'll say. It's actually more feasible than the house of cards that smart cities are, which is essentially run by a death cult for no other reason than it has to be based on suffering and death to sustain that much convenience and luxury, which is really what it takes to go off-grid. Not that it's unfeasible. It's very easy and simple, and nature is so abundant. But it requires giving up the luxury and the convenience that is so deeply programmed, especially with material worship, especially with money worship, when you're not actually straining your emotions tremendously. You're not straining your faith tremendously. You're not straining your body. You're not straining your mind tremendously to figure out hard problems. You are in a smart city just living life. You're getting your groceries down the street. You have a smartphone, this and that. And it's not to say you can't have some of these technologies in an off-grid thing. You know, we have solar panels. You know, if there's ways to connect to that are Starlink, why not, right? But it's more so that feasibility-wise, it's not feasible to have 200 and 250,000 towns across United States alone living these modern lifestyles backed by underground child trafficking that's systematically embedded into public education, public institutions, charity organizations, lined up with the underground layer of most of these cities, lined up with the police and fire department to damage control these systems. So, feasibility-wise, don't talk to me about that because, oh, voice error, voice call disconnected. Look, are you still there? Yeah. Yep. Yo, tell the fucking truth, the bot hangs up. That's how we're going to end the episode. Have a blessed day, y'all. Much love.
Thanks for tuning in to The Blunt Truth with Steven and Dougie. Enjoy the conversation. Join us every Wednesday for more unfiltered discussions. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Your support keeps the truth coming. Elevate your journey. Connect with us on social media at BluntTruthPodcast.com. Until next time, be kind, keep growing, and remember, knowledge is infinite.